Hello and everyone. Welcome into the week 2 Sunday morning fantasy life live stream. I'm Matt Freedman. I'm here with Chris Allen. Chris, it's mornings like this that I wish I was on caffeine. Haven't done caffeine in years. Not enough sleep. What was I doing? I don't know. Those Battlestar Galactica episodes aren't going to rewatch themselves. So it's a great morning to be talking some football. Everyone, welcome into the chat here. We're gonna have just Q&A, fantasy football questions going back and forth. Chris, how's it going?
I'm doing well, and I'm with you, man. I haven't had any caffeine this morning either, and I know I'm going to need it because with as many questions I'm assuming we're going to get this morning from the chat, I mean, we're going to need to answer. We're going to need to be able to answer some questions quickly. But I've got questions. After week one, are the things that we saw in week one going to be the same things we're going to see this weekend? Are my Bengals going to play the same way they did last week? Are the Falcons going to perform the same way they did with Kirk Cousins looking like he's still a bit rusty after the Achilles injury? I've got so many questions about the things that I saw just 7 days ago that I'm hoping we can. I will definitely be able to help the people in the chat today, but I've still got plenty of questions enough of my own. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into it, man. Hopefully we can help everybody out today.
Before we get into it, I'm going to have one quick question here because you touched on something I think is interesting. So, just kind of generally, when you're balancing week one versus all of the previous, maybe misconceptions, but all the ideas that you had entering the season, where is it that you kind of balance out? Is it's just one data point, don't want to overweight it, or is it, you know what, like it's the most relevant data point we have. I certainly don't want to underweight it. Like, how do you kind of balance between thinking about everything you thought entering the season and everything you think now based on week one?
I think it starts with the how big of that delta is between what we thought going into the season and what we saw this past week. The easiest example I could say is like, let's say Marvin Harrison Jr. from this past weekend. Everybody thought that he was the wide receiver one, like from a prospect standpoint coming out of this class. He comes out last week in what we thought was going to be a fairly decent matchup, an up-tempo matchup for the Cardinals in his debut with Kyler Murray, and he goes out and he has a dud. But why was it? I mean, that's really like my approach to understanding like why that gap exists is like kind of the whys. And going out and seeing he actually had like the route participation was there for him. And then also the route tree that he was used on was somewhat incongruent to being a fantasy producer, because if Kyler Murray was going to get pressured as much as he was, the types of routes that he was running primarily from the outside and not really being in sync with Kyler Murray. Like when he goes and does his Kyler Murray thing of doing like, the pirouette in the backfield, like running around and scrambling, indicating a guy that's open in the flats, or like the Michael Wilson scramble drill for a touchdown. That stuff that's just not going to be there for a rookie that is playing his first NFL game. So it's just understanding the whys that helps me kind of bring together this picture of, okay, well, maybe things might change for a guy like Marvin Harrison, or like for my Bengals, like things might change because Joe Burrow didn't know Jamar Chase was going to be playing until he got to the stadium and like at the beginning of the game on Sunday. Just stuff like that, where I need context and data to then help me bridge that gap between, oh, things are going to be completely over, and kind of overreact to things that I see in week one.
All right, so I'm looking here in the chat. I notice Around the Fur has a statement. Week one feels a lot like final preseason game sometimes, and I feel like
Yes.
that is instructive, and that especially feels like it has been all the more the case since we went to the 17 game season a few years ago, where more teams are just taking the preseason kind of easy. Obviously fewer preseason games for all of the teams, fewer padded practices for all of the teams. And so it feels like week one is just kind of like an extended, like that transitionary period from the preseason into the regular season. And some teams get off to a much faster start than others. And
Mm-hmm.
so, something for us to kind of keep in mind as we move into week two, and also, for future seasons, trying to think about what we should expect out of teams in week one who really didn't, get their full complement of players. As we get into the Q&A here, and a lot of people, oh my goodness, someone's already asking about kickers. We will have only one question though.
Only one. I'm with you on that.
As we get into this and people are trying to fire off some questions, just kind of reminders, people have a sense of who is in and who is out. There aren't, I think, all that many questions about whether someone is going to be able, like whether someone's on the borderline entering this week, about whether they're going to be able to play. I think the one person who kind of stands out to me is AJ Brown, in part because he's playing on Monday Night Football, so people might have some questions there. I'm skeptical that we see him play. I don't know if we've seen more reporting on it. He's technically questionable, but he has the full practice, limited practice, did not practice trend. And anytime you see that, it's like, you know what? Basically just assume this guy's not likely to play. So that's where I am on AJ Brown. But do you have any thoughts?
I completely agree. Trending in the wrong direction in my mind. If there was an even like a limited practice, even though the team was essentially doing the walkthrough Saturday, still not seeing him out there, that would kind of lead me to believe they're making plans to not have him Monday night. So checking your bench and seeing what are other options you might have. Of course, you probably don't have a one-to-one replacement for an AJ Brown, I would assume, unless you're playing in one of those small field type of leagues. But if you have a legitimate wide receiver too that you picked up, let's say you went and got a Demarcus Robinson, or you took your shot on a Tyler Johnson from the Rams, like that'll be playing this afternoon. I think those are the types of guys I would aim for in terms of the quick replacement for AJ Brown. But hopefully you might have some other options available to you. Just depends on your league format.
Yeah. So let's say, you're starting 2 wide receivers, and then a flex or something, maybe even 3 wide receivers and a flex, but you're in a fortunate situation where you hit wide receiver early, like a lot of drafters do hit wide receiver early. And so it's like, hey, do I go with AJ Brown or do I go with like Brian Thomas? Right. If it's
Yeah.
like a situation like that, it's like, I think you got to go with Brian Thomas,
Oh,
even though
yeah.
he's starting on Sunday, like you got to go with him. All right, so let's start to get into here. Start AJ Brown, and if he doesn't play, stream Ray McLeod, or just start David Montgomery for AJ at flex. Yeah, I mean, I think you got to go with the safe play here and get the guy who is guaranteed to get you some points. I would go with David Montgomery in that situation.
I also agree. It was good to see him, not just the split between him and Jahmyr Gibbs in week one, but it was all him in the overtime push that they had in order to seal the win over like in week one. So if I was going to take anybody, I would definitely take the points in that situation. And it's not just like the safe production. I mean, this is going to be high in production in a matchup with the Bucks that we know is going to be high scoring. So if I had to pick between any of them, I would take D-Mon.
Mm-hmm. All right, and just so everyone is aware, we on the site have free rankings that everyone can look at. Right, Ian has rankings there. Waz has rankings. Charch has rankings. Dwayne and I also have rankings there. Dwayne and I also have projections on the site. So if at some point we don't get to the question that you have, go to the site, check out the rankings that we have there. We will be updating rankings all the way to kickoff. So just again, we love having you in the chat here. We love answering the questions. Also, check out the rankings. All right. Should I trade Mason and Pickens for Marvin Harrison? I really got no RB2, but got CMC on IR. My quick thoughts on this. I mean, there's no guarantee that Harrison is going to be better than Pickens for the rest of the year based on what we've seen. And Mason looks like such a beast within that 49ers offense. And really, like any running back plugged into the Shanahan system since, like the days that Shanahan's dad was doing it with the Broncos, any running back plugged into that system, who's the lead back, feels like someone you want on your team. So I would keep Mason and Pickens, but that's just me.
I would agree with you there. I mean, Pickens doesn't have a large contingent of receivers behind him challenging him for targets, 31% target share in week one. Now, I say that, and that's a large number, but look at who it's coming from in Justin Fields. I mean, like no disrespect to Fields, but relatively speaking, if I was getting passes from Kyler Murray versus Justin Fields, I'd probably go with the first guy. I mean, that's just me. But let's hope that Marvin Harrison's situation improves over the coming weeks. But as of right now, you have the production of Jordan Mason. You have ties to one of the most efficient offenses in football. And on top of that, you do get a wide receiver in George Pickens that's going to have one of the largest target shares from a wide receiver perspective. So I would hold both of those guys, just knowing the opportunities that you can get with both of them.
Yeah, I'm total agreement there. All right, 2 quarterback league. Who should I sit? Richardson, Goff, or Cousins? I will say there's definitely one guy you do not sit, and that is Anthony Richardson. I want that dude in all of my lineups. In leagues where I could potentially trade for him, although I'm not going to be getting him at a discount now, I would still be interested in
Mhm.
trading for him once he has a down game. Because at some point, based on like the volatile way in which he plays, there will be a down game. And at that point, maybe try to trade for him. But Anthony Richardson, for sure, I'm starting. And so it comes down to Goff versus Cousins. I feel like this is Goff playing indoors at home is a big favorite in a game with a 52.5 point total. Going against a Buccaneers defense that I still don't have a ton of respect for, missing some guys in the secondary. I think you go with Jared Goff. And so I would say you bench Cousins, who looked pretty vulnerable last week as a sort of like statue sitting duck in the pocket for the Falcons. But what are your thoughts here?
No, I 100% agree with Cousins being the one to sit there. I mean, the underlying metrics, and this goes back to the conversation we are having at the Open, is if there's going to be this large of a split between what we expected and what we saw in Week 1, like how do we try and reconcile that difference? And for Cousins, he's one of the ones where I can't. Because coming into the season, Zach Robinson as the OC, the Rams type of offense where it's supposed to be high tempo, it's supposed to be higher pass rate over expectation, and we saw none of that. I mean, all the things that most analysts were saying over the week of what he was in shotgun almost primarily, except for I think it was like a spike. The one time he was under center, I think 29th, 30th in pass rate over expectation. I mean, this is not the same offense that we were promised over the offseason. So until I see a bit more from a play volume standpoint, from Cousins being able to push the ball downfield perspective, I'll give that another week to see if things improve.
Yeah, around the aforementioned, Cousins looked beyond dusty or beyond rusty, and I would say like yes, he looked outright dusty.
Yes.
I mean, did we even? This is just kind of going on a tangent, but did we even like see him have to run in terms of like a 2 minute offense, kind of have to move down the field quickly in order to be able to take a snap? Like, I have concerns about his ability even to do that, like
Yeah.
much less like navigate the pocket. So yeah, Cousins is not anyone I want anywhere near a roster right now. Okay, next question here. Should I start Justice Hill or Rico Daddle? It's sad, I know. Don't ask. LOL. Love how you had to contextualize it in that way. I will
Yeah.
say this is not the week that I want to start Justice Hill. Like Justice Hill is, like the pretty clean, like change of pace back for the Ravens, but I feel like it's more like he's a third down, like kind of like passing specialist kind of back. Like that's a lot of the work that he got last week. The Ravens at home as favorites of like anywhere from 8 to 9 points in the market. Like this feels like a Derrick Henry game. I don't think Justice
Mhm.
Hill is going to get a lot of run unless it's just the Ravens getting out to such a big lead that Justice Hill in the fourth quarter ends up getting some carries and maybe gets kind of a garbage time touchdown. So that puts me a little bit more towards Rico Daddle, who is in more of a timeshare with Ezekiel Elliott anyway, and also has the benefit of being a home favorite. I think he has a better chance of, just kind of randomly finding the end zone than Justice Hill does this week. So I would probably go with Rico. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at as well, because while Rico didn't find the box last week against the Browns, I mean, he did just lose to 2 carries. I think it was 10 for Ezekiel Elliott, 8 for Rico Dowdle. So while Elliott winds up being the better fantasy producer, that's just because he wound up falling into the end zone, which at least in Week 1 we expected Zeke to have that type of role. So in I would say a much easier matchup for the Cowboys this week, and the same thing for the Ravens, but I think with the Ravens, it's more of I would see their offense trying to operate the way that they want to. Do they really want Lamar Jackson out there scrambling 16 times in a particular game? Do they want Mark Andrews not being involved in the passing game? I would assume no for both of those questions. So this could be where we see Derrick Henry get more involved and be more productive as a rusher, but then also the passing game starts to be a bit more of what we expect it to be, and that leaves Justice Hill out of the equation. Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, and all the rest of guys in the equation for Week 2. So I would leave Justice Hill out of that for this week.
Yeah, looking at the rankings, I think across the board, we pretty cleanly have Dowdle ahead of Hill, but I'd say they're in the same general tier. All right, next question here: Malachi Corley or Troy Franklin? I mean, the gods of fantasy are not good to you, my friend.
Yeah, that's tough.
This feels like a situation where the correct answer really is like neither. And hopefully, I mean, seriously, you have to be able to find someone on waivers unless this is the deepest of leagues. Right? I mean, really, the answer is neither. You are not starting either of these guys. There has to be someone on waivers.
Yeah, that would have to be my put for this. If I had to choose between either of them, maybe you could talk yourself into Troy Franklin because Devon Vele is not going to be playing today with the ribs injury. But please, I would just look at your waiver wire, see if there's somebody out there that you could potentially pick up that would have a better shot of earning opportunities in a better offense than either of those two guys.
Yeah, Troy Franklin. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking at he literally did not play any offensive snaps last
Last
week.
week,
Like
no.
you cannot enter into this contest with Troy Franklin. So I would just say like just by process of elimination, it has to be Malachi Corley. That said, Corley played literally, I'm looking now, he played literally one snap last week. There
So
has to be there
better.
has to be someone on waivers, my friend.
Yeah.
Just I'm sad for you. I hope you're able to
Jalen Naylor, if you want to try and find
yes.
somebody. Yeah, if you're really like trying to dive deep into a hat or something like that, like with that Jordan Addison out, maybe Jalen Naylor might be the call that you would make over either of those guys.
Yeah. Okay. So next question here. Yeah, Franklin was inactive. Ron Burgundy. Thank you for
Thank you
letting
for
us
that.
know that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, there's a decent chance that Franklin doesn't suit up. So, anyway, he
Yeah.
might, but just this is suboptimal situation all the way around.
Yes.
All right. So what tight end should I pick up when Ferguson is declared inactive? Yeah, by the way, Ferguson, I think officially doubtful, which basically means he's not playing. Is the Scooter going to be a sufficient replacement? All the rest of the junk tight ends on the wire, like Conklin, Oten, etc. So I would say that they all feel like they're kind of in the same tier. I'm pretty pessimistic about like Schooner in general as a replacement. I'm looking at it here. I think I'd kind of rather go with Conklin, but like it's not like a strong lean either way. Do you have any thoughts on this while I look at my rankings?
Sure. And my only lean towards Otten is just because we do know that the route rate was going to be there. He did earn like 2 to 3 targets just this past week. And while I'm more on the, like from the Bucks passing standpoint, I'm on the Evans, Godwin, McMillan hype train. If there was going to be a tight end that's going to let's scream like that helps nobody, like when they wind up falling into the end zone, if Caden Otten is out there, if he is earning targets in this, at least potentially efficient offense or passing offense. We'll see how Baker does this week because it is going to be the one week where he shines. And then when everybody believes him in week 2, that's when the bottom falls out for him. At least that's what I'm assuming is going to happen this weekend. But if there is going to be any of the tight ends that are out there getting their cardio and getting some targets as well, I will lean towards Otten just because of the matchup.
All right. Yeah, agree. So looking at the rankings now, I have Conklin 18, Otten 19, and then way down the board at number 33, I have Schoonmaker. And the thing with Schoonmaker is like, even if he ends up playing like starter level snaps, no guarantee he's getting the ball going his way because there are just so many other players within that offense who have a clear priority over him in the pecking order. And the Cowboys, as 6-point favorites at home, they could end up running the ball a decent amount in the second half anyway. So yeah, I think it's definitely not Schoonmaker. All right. Good morning, fantasy nerds. Thank you. And top of the morning to you as well. Neighbors or Nico Collins today, half PPR. I'll just say quickly, Neighbors did pop up on the injury report on Thursday, but he practiced fully on Friday and, wasn't listed at all as someone who was like questionable or anything like that entering the weekend. So like Neighbors, there was a little bit of a scare there, but Neighbors is full go. I have these guys in the same tier. I have Collins 14 and Neighbors 15. Flip a coin. I would probably go slightly with Collins because I mean, that's how I have them ranked. But how do you feel about this?
I lean towards Collins just because of the I'd say the quarterback difference. Like that's where I would give the lean or give the edge to Collins there. I mean, definitely showed out from a route rate, targets per route run rate, like over Malik Neighbors, like in week 1. And this is just going to be like, and the fact that Collins has both Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell to potentially take targets away, and he was still earning those downfield shots, still being efficient like on the intermediate and deep receptions that he was able to make just this past weekend. It just leads me to believe that this is going to be a connection between him and Stroud that we're going to want to lean on from a fantasy perspective. And while I know that Neighbors had like the hype coming out of college, through the draft process and over the offseason, it's the specter, or it's not even a specter, it's actually Daniel Jones looming over Neighbors and his potential fantasy production that gives me at least some sort of concern. Now, I get the matchup against Washington as one that we're going to want to target, but if I had to pick one, I'll take the guy that I know is going to create fantasy production versus the guy that I hope is going to create fantasy production.
Yeah, I think that's right there. I agree with that. All right, everyone who's just joining, welcome into the Fantasy Life live stream for Sunday morning, week 2 NFL. He's Chris. I'm Freedman. And we're answering all of your fantasy football questions like this one. Yo, Bowers or Evan Ingram? This one, to me, looking at it, I'll just say generally, Bowers is someone I'm still like a little bit skeptical of, given that he's a rookie tight end. Now, we saw rookie tight ends do well last year, but rookie tight ends can take some time to get up to speed, and then specifically the offense that he is in with Gardner Minshew throwing him the ball in a system that is, I think, pretty inefficient in general and very based on the ground game. So I lean towards Evan Ingram, but like they're in the same tier. I have Ingram at tight end 8. Bowers is tight end 10. What do you think, Chris?
No, I think that's completely fair to lean towards Ingram in this one. Bowers, like while it was a solid showing from an opportunity standpoint, 25% of their targets in week 1. I do want to see how that pecking tree like winds up shaking out. It was 6, 7, 8 targets for Devontae Adams, which is somewhat of a disappointment from a box score standpoint. Alexander Madison getting 6 targets, which was kind of wild. And again, one of those week 1 outliers, or we think it might be an outlier. That let's see how that target distribution shakes out in week 2. We know they're going to have a fairly tough matchup this weekend since they are playing against Baltimore, right? Yeah, playing against Baltimore this weekend. So that's where I would lean more towards Ingram and what should be a slightly better matchup. And we know the opportunities are going to be there for him, just given the passing distribution with him, Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. Those are really the guys for Trevor Lawrence. So I give the edge to Ingram here.
All right, we've got a question from Heather. James Conner or Malik Neighbors in PPR format? So my general inclination when it comes to flex questions and you're thinking about running backs versus wide receivers, I think running backs tend to have the higher kind of like solid floor, whereas the wide receivers tend to have like the wider range of outcomes. So if you're in a matchup where you are more of a dog, I think, all things being equal, if these guys are ranked in the same tiers, it maybe makes more sense to go with the wide receiver if you're just kind of looking for that big, like peak explosive performance. But, kind of case by case basis, I think risk tolerance really dictates a lot of it. I go with James Conner. I think Connor's like probably half tier to a full tier above Neighbors. They're at home, they're favored, they're going against a Rams defense that no longer has Aaron Donald in the middle, and James Conner is like one of the true like real workhorses still in the NFL. And as long as he's healthy, and it's the beginning of the season, he's still healthy, I would be going with Conner.
Well, I'll go ahead and let our start sit tool do some of the work for us. In fact, we had to compare the two. It looks like the tool says that James Conner should be the one. And I do agree. I mean, Rams defense last week with some of the changes on defense, to your point, Aaron Donald not being there, 21st in run stop win rate. Playing against who do they want to playing against last week? Who do they have last week? Oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Help me, Matt. Who did the Rams play last week in the it was Detroit.
They play the Lions.
Yeah, it's Detroit. And we saw how well the Lions running game was against the Rams defense. It was James Conner still being the primary running back. I mean, Amari DiMercato being subbed in a little bit here and there, on passing downs. But if James Conner still getting the primary role that we want against a Rams defense that we know is going to be somewhat soft from a run defense standpoint, then yeah, I'll give the edge to Conner here.
All right, so this next question, also from Heather, we were looking at 4 wide receivers, need 2 for PPR, Neighbors, Rice, Harrison, Drake London. I mean, I'll say it feels like this is a very nice situation to be in. It's almost a shame that you can start only 2 of them.
Right.
Really. But I think Rashee Rice is the clear guy that you put in here. And then after that, it's between the other 3. I would probably still lean with Neighbors. A little bit hesitant about what we saw out of Drake London last week in that offense, and the same thing with Marvin Harrison. Like he's clearly not the priority in the Cardinals offense. Not to say like he can't bounce back and he still won't have like a great season or anything like that, but we saw like they're not force feeding him the ball. Neighbors is the priority within the Giants offense. I would go with Rice and Neighbors. What do you think?
Like 100% agree there. At least Neighbors, from his standpoint, he was out there like earning around like 26% of the air yards, which is, at least from that standpoint, it's like the ball's going to him downfield. He is at least like something of a priority in that offense. Whereas with Marvin Harrison, I mean, less than 10%, like around like 10, like 12% of the air yards. So
Yeah.
if we already have concerns about the opportunity, we saw more of Greg Dortch and Trey McBride being involved from a passing standpoint, where Malik Neighbors, it was like him, Wan'Dale Robinson. Okay, fine. And especially the matchup for for Neighbors, like going up against the Commanders secondary, I would lean more towards Neighbors there.
All right. So this next question here, Najee over Ford. This is from Jordan. So I will say, if you look in the free bet tracker that we have at Fantasy Life, I have a touchdown prop on Najee Harris this week.
Ooh.
I like the odds of him getting into the end zone. Uh, I have him slightly ranked ahead of Jerome Ford, but some of the other rankers prefer Ford. And I will say, if you're looking at our our rankings here, they're neck and neck. We have Ford at 24.4 and Harris is the next guy right after him at 24.6. So I would just say this feels very much like a coin flip. Um, I would probably lean slightly towards Harris in that he is favored in his matchup, and I think a better chance that we see the Steelers, really try to establish their ground game. But I mean, it's close between those two. Chris, do you have any strong lean one way or the other between those two guys?
It is Najee Harris for me. It was good to see him like getting the majority work like in week one. Now that was from an offensive standpoint, it was somewhat expected that we would see the Steelers like lean more, be more predicated like on the run. They were dead last or 30th rather, 30th in passer over expectation like in week one. So seeing him like being the guy that they were using primarily over Jalen Warren, who did have that hamstring issue like throughout the back end of preseason. So I can see why ramping Warren up would be the way that they want to approach this. And especially with the quarterback shift, having Justin Fields under center versus Russell Wilson, it just kind of leads it to, okay, let's continue to have this offense, the personnel groupings out there the way that they had it last week. And since it worked last week, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would say Najee Harris is in line for a similar workload in week two.
Yeah, I mean the amazing thing is, so I wrote him up as as someone in the Freedman's Favorites article that I do every week that comes out on Wednesdays. People check it out. Just easy plug right there, just seamless plug. But he was one of the guys I wrote up, and the thing is kind of amazing. Like you're looking at the numbers, and like especially if you dig into the utilization report that we have, which I think is like one of the best tools in the industry. You could like look at some of the underlying numbers and be like, well, he was on the field only like, I don't know, it was like 57% of the time.
Mhm.
Like he didn't have like a massive like number of like on a percentage basis of like the team's carries, but it's like the team is so run heavy that he still had like 20 carries,
Right.
So it's like he doesn't need to dominate the backfield that the way a lot of other running backs would need to, like on a percentage basis, for him still to get the requisite number of carries of having a pretty big game. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do like about Harris. It's like the one silver lining to the Arthur Smith playbook. The running backs at least will get some healthy attention there. All right, I have a big trade. I have Chase trying to decide, do I take Mahomes and Gibbs or Jackson and Achane? So Jamar Chase, I'm assuming that's who they're talking about. I have Jamar Chase, so I take Mahomes and Gibbs, or Lamar Jackson and Devon Achane. Do you have any strong leaning on this? This feels pretty lateral, honestly.
Yeah, because I'm not seeing like what are you really gaining by making a move in either direction. So yes, of course, like with Achan, the concern is Tua Tagovailoa's health and whether or not he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins at what point during the season or at any point during the rest of the regular season. But if we're going to continue to see HN like be used in the passing game this much, and I'm assuming this is a PPR league, then it might not matter. Given some practice time and some like the ability for Skylar Thompson to really get a handle for the playbook, since Achane has been used as much as a receiver, the concerns about the Dolphins' offensive line might not be as, I guess, as frightful as one might put it out to be. So, and even if you do want to take an Achane, having Lamar Jackson as your quarterback can kind of paper over some of those efficiency concerns. So I'm not seeing a real win in either direction. But if you want to like go for safety, I guess take Mahomes and Gibbs and see how everything works out.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I would say, Nando, if you can put that one back up again, I would say for a situation like this where it feels fairly lateral, I think I would lean into the situation where if I have a strong lean or just like a strong feeling on any of these four players, that is probably the side that I go with. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
would say like, and now in this case, I have like two conflicting leans. Like one is like I think Mahomes is going to have a pretty big year. Like
Yep.
it feels like that Chiefs offense is pretty much back on track. So I'm not going to say this is like 2018 Mahomes where it's like 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, but like
Yeah.
I feel like it could be a really big season for Mahomes. That said, Lamar Jackson in week one looked very much like Lamar Jackson. There's always the question as to whether he can stay healthy. But the real thing for me is like Achan. Like, I feel like Achan has had two like really good games without him even having like an explosive Achan game.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
is the thing that just like sends me over the edge. Like he already has 265 yards from scrimmage and two touchdowns, and he hasn't had any of those highlight runs yet to where it's like,
Mm.
oh man, he burned everyone with an 80-yard touchdown. Like, you know that those runs are coming at some point. And so even though I think Mahomes has the higher floor, is like safer than Jackson because of the injury concerns, I probably still lean Jackson and Achane because as long as Jackson is healthy, he's obviously right there with Mahomes and maybe a little bit higher than Mahomes week to week. And then Achane, I mean, the ceiling with Achane is so high, and with Gibbs, like he's still going to have to battle David Montgomery for like end zone opportunities. And so I lean Achane, but like I would just say like kind of throw your hands in the air. This feels like a coin flip. If you have
Yeah.
really like if you have a strong feeling about any one of those four players, that's probably the way that I would go. All
I
right,
feel it.
pick two full PPR: Brian Thomas Jr., McLaurin, Xavier Worthy. Chris, any feelings here and how you would be going around about this? Uh, I think Chris just froze, or maybe I am frozen. I'm going to move forward as if I am not the one who is frozen here. And I will answer the question. Let me see if I'm getting anything from the producer. Yeah, it is just me. Okay, so Brian Thomas Jr., McLaurin. All right, another question here. Yeah, go back to the Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, thank you. All right, so Brian Thomas Jr., McLaurin, or Worthy. I mean, Worthy is the kind of guy who's not getting all that much on a consistent basis so far in terms of the touches, based on what we saw last week. But he is just so Tyreek Hill esque explosive that there's no way I want to sit him right now because I don't want to live with that regret when he goes off for like 80 yards and two touchdowns on, like quote unquote, just four touches in a game. So I would be going with Xavier Worthy, even though it's full PPR, even though like he's not getting the full workload, I would still be going with him. And then one more week, I'd be going with Terry McLaurin over Brian Thomas. McLaurin is like the number one option within that passing offense. It's not locked in yet that Brian Thomas is the number one option within his receiving game. So I would be going with Xavier Worthy first, Terry McLaurin, and then like Thomas isn't a terrible option, but I prefer the other two guys. All right, Xavier Worthy or Devin Singletary in the flex half PPR already starting neighbors. So Xavier Worthy, talked about him just a little bit ago. Devin Singletary, I will just say he outright terrifies me because of the offense that he's in. And I do believe that I have a position on the under for his rushing attempts this week. I believe that number was 14.5, and I took the under. I think I have that projected more like 10.5, 11.5. So if I'm not thinking that Singletary is even going to get all that many opportunities, that's probably going to put me on the position of Xavier Worthy having the higher ceiling and just like more of the profile of what I want. And I will say the idea that you are already starting Neighbors, that doesn't factor into it so much for me. It would if we were thinking about, DFS GPP scenario where you're just looking at the ceiling for everyone. But if you're thinking just about kind of like what is the base case like median scenario, I would be going with Xavier Worthy and not thinking about Devin Singletary with the Neighbors. All right, you are back, Chris.
I'm back.
You are back.
Let's
All
do
right.
this.
So next question here we have J.K. Dobbins over Marvin Harrison for week 2
Ooh.
question mark. I mean, look, J.K. Dobbins looked awesome. Well, let me rephrase that. J.K. Dobbins had awesome production last week, and he looked really good in like the limited carries and like inside of 40 yards. When he started having to like try to pull away, he just doesn't have the long speed that he used to. But that said, he still has the offensive line and just the ability to get chunk yardage. And I'm probably going with Dobbins in this spot, but I will say it is super close. If you look at the start sit tool, we have these guys at 43.8 and 44.8. Like they are right there. But I have zero respect for the Carolina Panthers defense, especially now that they have defensive tackle Derek Brown, who's probably the best player on that unit. Now that they have him out, I would be going with J.K. Dobbins. And I'll just say, like, in Survivor, I am very much going with the Chargers this week. What do you think, Chris?
No, I agree. And while I am somewhat concerned about like Dobbins over the course of the season, he was like the more efficient like rusher compared to Gus Edwards. I think it was around like a 50% rushing success rate for Dobbins in week 1. Chargers, we know, are going to be one of the teams that lean more towards the rush. Pass rate over expectation was around like 20th if memory serves. And like again, I'm hoping for Marvin Harrison's sake, we do see more of a diverse route tree. They are hitting him on like the short and intermediate, like let's say like the slants, the crossers, things to get the ball in his hand, because Kyler Murray does get pressure in his face like fairly quickly relative to the rest of the quarterbacks in the league. But I don't have those. I don't have the same concerns from an offensive standpoint for J.K. Dobbins. We know he's going to be the primary rusher on his team. We know that team is going to be one of the teams that lean more towards on the rush in order to create offensive production. And of course, this is going to be against a matchup against the Carolina Panthers that we know that we want to at least have pieces of on the opposite side. So I think that kind of hits the trifecta for me for Dobbins. So between those two, while I have hope for Harrison long term, I think Dobbins is the one for week 2 as of right now.
Yeah, absolutely agree with there. All right, what if you have Jahan Dotson? Would he be worth starting over Brown if he is out? I mean, if I'm assuming you're asking about AJ Brown. If AJ Brown is out, then you obviously have to start someone in that spot. I guess Jahan Dotson is fine, but it's not as if you want to roll into Monday Night Football with Jahan Dotson as your backup option. That's my opinion. I think it's probably like 80 to 90% that AJ Brown is out, and Jahan Dotson, even with Brown being out, and even with who's the young, it's not Thrash, I'm gonna have to look it up, but they have like the number 4 wide receiver, Johnny Wilson, who is also questionable, but I think likely to be out because he popped up on Wednesday with a hamstring issue as well. So even with your number 1 and number 4 wide receivers both presumably out, so theory, that means more opportunities for Jahan Dotson. Even with that scenario, I'm still not all that interested in starting Jahan Dotson. Like, I would be hoping that there's someone else that I can get on waivers or already on my bench that I can plug in and just plan on starting today.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. The positives for Dotson, 63% route rate in his debut, like with the Eagles, so that is good to see. He is that third wide receiver. Johnny Wilson, to your point, like was having, at least I thought he was having some like hamstring or something like that issues, like in the back end of the preseason.
Yeah.
So since he was only also both of them tied for targets, but it was Dotson the one that was out there running some more routes. Even if that's the case, though, I mean, I could still see a game plan where it is Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. Let's see how much more we can get out of Saquon Barkley as a receiver. That's where I see them. They lean more on the offensive nucleus, like the primary producers for this offense. We're saying, oh yeah, in week 2, let's go ahead and let's get Jahan Dotson, the guy we just traded for a few weeks ago. Let's get him 5, 6, 7 targets. I mean, if I had to weigh the probability of both of those outcomes, I would lean more towards Smith, Goddard, Barkley being the beneficiaries of AJ Brown, like assuming he's going to be out on Monday, him being those 3 being the beneficiaries of that passing production versus let's just throw all of our eggs in the Jahan Dotson basket.
Yeah, like at this point, Jahan Dotson goes from being the 5th most important person in the receiving game to the 4th most important person in the receiving game. Like,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah. On a team that's still
yeah.
going to run once they get inside of the 10-yard line.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So again, if you're just joining, welcome to the Fantasy Life Sunday morning week 2 live stream. I'm Freedman. He is Chris Allen. All right, Jordan Mason or Pacheco. Heather, this is an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, my goodness,
like,
what does
you
mean?
are starting. I imagine you are starting both of these players. If not, I mean, congratulations on having just the depth of talent at running back position where it's like, oh, I also have Saquon Barkley. I'm obviously starting him. So, all right, Jordan Mason or Pacheco. I still go, oh, man, this is tough. I still go Pacheco, I think, because he's at home. He's a big favorite. He's going against a Cincinnati Bengals defense. And sorry, Chris, hate to say anything bad about that defense, but that has been more vulnerable against running attacks with no DJ Reader there in the middle. There you go. I mean, it could be worse for the Bengals, but it could also be a lot better. I would probably going with Pacheco in this case, but I mean, I can see the case for Jordan Mason, who looked awesome last week and had like the volume going in his direction. I don't know, Chris, which way are you going here?
I think it's Pacheco for me, and it's not just from the situation. Yes, going against my Bengals, it's probably going to be a tough day for me to watch football later this afternoon when I have to watch the Bengals play. But I think my concern for Mason is not just from a rushing standpoint, but he wasn't as used as much as a receiver as CMC has been in the past. Whereas Pacheco, let's see how much Samaje Perine is going to get like ramped up inside of the Chiefs offense. So maybe that does siphon away some looks from Patrick Mahomes for Pacheco. But if I already have some concerns about Jordan Mason as a receiver, and we can already see a scenario where Brandon Ayuk being somewhat rusty in week 1 now starts to garner some more looks. George Kittle being a bit more explosive and him also being rusty in week 1 starts to get some more looks. And of course, Deebo Samuel being the wide back that he is in this offense without Christian McCaffrey in it, I can see a scenario where Jordan Mason gets the bulk of the carries. He is essentially like the Kyron Williams, for the 49ers, but he's not getting the receiving work that we really need in order to make him that elite tier type of running back. Where Pacheco, I know that elite type of opportunity is going to be there for him. So that's why I think the tool gives Pacheco the edge in this case, and I would also give Pacheco the edge in this case as well.
All right. Next question here from Jose Hernandez. I need a flex. London versus Charbonnet. I just need reassurance, LOL, and then a whole lot of stuff after that in terms of hand pink waving. Okay. So Kenneth Walker. I would want to verify. I don't believe he's officially been ruled out. I think he's technically listed as doubtful, but he's not playing in this game. Did not practice at all this week with the oblique issue. And so it is almost certainly Charbonnet who is going to be leading the backfield there. We don't know yet if it's going to be something of a split, but I could see Charbonnet pretty much dominating the backfield there. And so if that is the case, I am probably leaning more towards Charbonnet versus Drake London. Talked about London earlier. I'm just concerned about that Falcons offense in general. I feel like we know what Drake London's role within that offense is, just still kind of uncertain about how that offense is going to function. With Charbonnet, we did see the ground game really be the way that the Seahawks were able to progress on offense last week. And so I think they will probably still continue to try to lean on the ground game. And I think a lot of that goes through Charbonnet, who also has the pass catching ability there. He's got like the 3-down skill set. So I would go with Charbonnet, but looking at the start sit tool, it's close.
Yeah, and I would go, for me, it'd be Charbonnet, Dell, and then B-Rob if I had to rank those three. To your point, Freedman, at least we saw Charbonnet mixing in somewhat with Kenneth Walker. That was throughout the game. Now I know Walker left towards the back end of their week 1 contest, like with the oblique injury that wound up being the reason why he's going to be out for week 2. But if we'd also saw Charbonnet out there running routes as well, he should get like that type of workload that we would expect. And so with Tank Dell battling with Stephon Diggs and with Nico Collins, like we talked about earlier in the show. Brian Robinson having to work around like Jaden Daniels as a rusher, because we did see like Daniels actually get into the box like as a runner in week 1. I would say Charbonnet at least grades out as the guy that has the clearest path like to getting a touchdown, or at least having the workload that will be requisite for an RB1. Because I'm not assuming Geno Smith is going to get like 30-yard rushing touchdowns every week like we saw in week 1. But out of all of those guys, Charbonnet at least has the easiest path to getting the most opportunities out of that bunch.
All right. So full PPR, flex 1, Tank Dell, Brian Robinson, or Charbonnet. Obviously, just talked about Charbonnet there. Oh, thanks, and keep up the good work. We appreciate that, Roberto. All right. So Tank Dell versus Robinson versus Charbonnet. Just flexing one of them again, full PPR. Do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, Charbonnet for me. Although you can make a case for Tank Dell, he did have like I think he out targeted Stephon Diggs like by 1 or 2 targets, but it was Stephon Diggs that got into the end zone twice. But I would say like Charbonnet is probably the easiest one, and then like Tank Dell right after that.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact season with Antonio Brown, but it was his last season with the Steelers, to where it was like he was clearly no longer the number 1 wide receiver in the offense, but the Steelers were giving him all of the end zone and red zone targets so that he could still peacock and feel really good about himself. That feels like the Stephon Diggs treatment of last week, to where it's like he's clearly not the number 1. He might not even be the number 2 in that offense, but he got the 2 touchdowns so that he can like feel good and not be like a locker room cancer. So anyway, that was a tangent. Tank Dell is interesting. And if I'm thinking running back or wide receiver, right, it's Charbonnet as the running back that I'm considering. I have Charbonnet ahead of Robinson. And then it's just the question of, are you looking for like that potential peak upside that I think you get a little more of with a wide receiver, or are you looking for the elevated floor that you get with just the projection, the volume that you can have with a running back? I still go Charbonnet kind of in most situations, but I think that's kind of like the way that you think about it. All right, next question here. Half PPR, Jaden Reed or Lad McConkey, and Jacksonville D or NDD. All right, so this first question that we've had here where someone's asking about a defense or a kicker here. So anyway, let's start with the quote unquote real question. Jaden Reed or Lad McConkey. Obviously, no Jordan Love. That really changes the way that you would project and view the Packers offense and pass catchers specifically. And then Lad McConkey, always the question about how run heavy is that Chargers offense going to be? How many targets are going to be available for all the pass catchers there? I mean, normal circumstances, it's Jaden Reed without any question. We're not in normal circumstances. I lean slightly towards McConkey.
I think I would lean towards McConkey as well, like 27-28% target share in his first outing, like with Justin Herbert. If like what we talked about earlier about Dobbins and the fact that we love the Chargers running game this weekend, but if the pass rate over expectation isn't going to be like, I don't know, like Atlanta, like we were talking earlier, where it's just like completely on the extreme end of the rushing spectrum, and there is going to be some volume there, like for the Chargers pass catchers. And we do know that the Panthers secondary, just the Panthers defense as a whole, is one that we want to target. If I had to pick any of the Chargers like receivers out of this game, it would be McConkey, just given the fact that also Palmer coming into this game with an injury as well.
Yes, great point.
That is also kind of that lends itself to McConkey being the guy that I would want over this in this particular situation.
All right, and then the second half of that question, the Colts versus the Jags. So basically, it's like which defense which quarterback would you rather go against? Would you rather go against Malik Willis, or would you rather go against Deshaun Watson?
I think
I think,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead. You go. You
Yeah,
go.
I mean, both pretty decent options to be
Yeah.
going against at this point, but I'd say clearly you'd rather go against Malik Willis. I mean, like backup quarterback, throws interceptions, yet to throw a touchdown in his career, takes so many sacks that it's just like a perfect setup. Doesn't know the offense because he just joined the team in the preseason. Perfect setup for a fantasy defense.
And I think that's where I would go as well, because I know Deshaun Watson, for most of his faults, he did at least have one long touchdown to Amari Cooper down the right side that went right through Cooper's fingers. That at least would have saved his and Amari Cooper's bacon, like from a fantasy standpoint. So if he can at least chuck up a couple of those against Jacksonville's secondary, which I think is completely possible in this matchup today, that's where I would lean more towards Malik Willis, or being the guy that you would want to target from a defensive standpoint, than Deshaun Watson.
All right. So next question here from Cody: Andrews or Goddard this week? All right. A couple of thoughts. This to me feels like a peak week one, like post week one type of question,
Yes.
where it's like, I've got Andrews. He's going to be my guy. I feel good about him. And then week one happens and you're just like, oh man, what am I doing here? I still would go with Andrews, like keep the faith. We know he's like, I would still say like the number one guy within that pass catching offense, although it is much more spread out than it used to be. I would still go with Andrews. We should see a theoretical bump with Goddard, with AJ Brown expected to be out. I still go with Andrews. But then I'll also say the second thing that pops into my mind is, how do you have both of these guys
right
on your team?
What happened?
Right. Like, so, yeah. Anyway, but I would go with Andrews.
You know how sometimes people say that when some folks like do things, it's like it's one for them and then one for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think last week for the Ravens, that was one for them. They had to play the game that way because it's Chiefs, Steve Spagnuolo, forcing them to play the way that they didn't want to play. Bracket coverage for Mark Andrews. Andy Holloway from the Fantasy Footballers had an excellent thread on how much like Andrews was being like double, triple teamed throughout most of the game to lead to that Isaiah Likely explosion that we saw. This week, though, I mean, against the Raiders, this one might be one for us. I mean, from the Baltimore Ravens standpoint, where they get back to doing the things that they want to do. Like we talked earlier about Derrick Henry being the guy that, like, we see him really get going versus Justice Hill being the running back that you would want to have on your roster, at least for the, like, just for the Ravens. But then also from a passing standpoint, instead of trying to use Zay Flowers or like trying to get the ball to Rashad Bateman, who didn't really show out in week one like we had hoped to, this could be the one where it's like, all right, Mark Andrews is the guy that Lamar Jackson's looking towards. So that's how, at least from a qualitative standpoint, I'm looking at this matchup. So while I think Goddard might get some more targets with AJ Brown, like being potentially out like for Monday night, if Andrews is going to be the guy we expected to, it's going to happen this week.
All right. This is an interesting question we have from Chip McNamara. Trade Brian Thomas for Charbonnet. I have Ken Walker. I feel like there's a lot of context that, like, more context that we would need to really be able to answer this question. But like the things that you want to think about when you're trying to determine stuff like this for trades, like, does Charbonnet really make a difference to your team? Like right now and kind of like long term, does he make a difference? Because if he doesn't, I would want to keep Brian Thomas because of the potential upside that he has. Like based on where it is that you probably got Brian Thomas in your draft, he could, I wouldn't say he could turn into a league winner, but he could turn into a guy who like really surprises and is like, oh, wait a minute. Like I now have like 4 studs at wide receiver versus like the 3 that I thought I had. And so I would just say like a guy who is attached to whatever you think of Trevor Lawrence, he's an above average quarterback. Like a guy who was great his last year of college, who looked good enough as a rookie in his NFL debut last week. I wouldn't want to be trading him right away, just in case there is like the peak scenario of like, wait a minute, this guy just turned into Odell Beckham Jr. in his like rookie season. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't want to trade that potential upside away for a guy who, when everything is normal, is the backup running back on his team. So that's just kind of the way that I'm looking at it. But we have, if you're looking at the rankings for this week, Charbonnet is ahead of Brian Thomas. Walker didn't practice at all this week. So I would already say that makes me feel like he's like probably on the doubtful side of playing next week. So that means you have potentially 2 weeks of Charbonnet as like a stud running back that you can count on. But again, like I just kind of don't want to trade away the upside of Brian Thomas Jr. unless Charbonnet makes a real difference for your team. And I think that's what you have to determine. Chris, what do you think?
I agree with you there, because let's say if we had more clarity on Ken Walker's situation, and let's say this oblique situation was going to keep him out for 3 to 4 weeks, kind of like the CMC Jordan Mason thing.
Yes.
Like, if I knew he was going to be out 2 to 3 more weeks, and so now I have a legitimate, to your point, like difference maker on my roster. And then, of course, once everything goes back to normal, there might be a split, and like the way we saw Charbonnet used in week 1 is more indicative with it. Okay, fine. But as of right now, Charbonnet has that contingent value, and if you drafted him, you got that contingent value that you expected to get out of him. But Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, second on the team in air yards in his first week, tied for first in targets, like with Christian Kirk. He's already out there being a difference maker on his own team. And so if this continues, and if he continues to work in with Trevor Lawrence, when we see that ascension continue to happen, like that we would hope to see, that he actually displaces Gabe Davis almost completely, and it really is just him, Ingram, and Kirk. Now you get what you expected to get out of Brian Thomas, and we're already seeing an indication of that. So unless you're getting more in return for Brian Thomas, I would value him much more than Zach Charbonnet at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, next question here. Darnell Mooney or Christian Kirk to replace AJ Brown. Again, people who are just joining, I'm Freedman. He's Chris. We're talking your week 2 live stream questions for fantasy football. AJ Brown, very much expected not to play on Monday Night Football. So that's the thing. Everyone who has AJ Brown, just make sure that you are getting your replacement set up now. So technically questionable for Monday Night Football, but has the full practice, limited practice, did not practice trend, which means highly unlikely he goes. So here, Mooney or Kirk to replace AJ Brown. Christian Kirk pretty easily. I don't know if this really even needs more explanation, but Christian Kirk still probably the number 1 within his offense. Darnell Mooney as just a supplementary piece within that Falcons offense that I have significant questions about.
Yeah, easy Kirk. I would lean towards him on this one. Mooney was even playing behind Ray McLeod in week 1, which is not great. I would assume. So I would easily go for Kirk in this matchup.
All right. Chip, thanking us for the great insight. You are welcome, Chip. By the way, why isn't everyone else thanking us for our great insight? All right, up your gratitude game, people.
Yes.
All right, half point PPR flex, Singletary, McLaurin, or Shaheed. So we've talked briefly about Singletary already today, talked briefly about McLaurin earlier today. We have not mentioned Rashid Shaheed, who, of course, is a favorite of Cooter Doodle. And also, I mean, just like a guy who's like a baller of a player. He's the kind of person I want on my fantasy teams. Even if I know hey, he's going to be very inconsistent, very volatile, which means more often than not, I'm going to end up getting just a couple of points from him. But that one time he goes off for 20 points, I'm going to feel like a king. Shaheed, though, getting more playing time on a more consistent basis than he has in previous seasons, which makes him much more viable as an option here. But all that said, got to go with Singletary. I think he's got the projectable volume that you can count on. But if you are considering Singletary versus one of these wide receivers, I would go with Terry McLaurin, who's the number 1 pass catching option within his offense. Shaheed, who has more explosiveness, is still the number 2 option in his offense. Maybe even number 3 pass catching offense option. Yeah.
If let's say you're starting off today, it's 0-0, I think Singletary is the guy that you would need to have. But let's say you went up against Devon Achane on Thursday night, or you went up against Khalil Shakir for whatever, James Cook after Thursday, or whatever the case may be, and you need some upside, I can understand going with either of the wide receiver options. But everything being neutral, we do know the workload is going to be there for Singletary. We love the matchup against the Commanders. The start sit tool loves them. So if you don't agree with me, agree with the numbers, and you can go with Singletary.
All right. Thank you to everyone who is thanking us. Around the fur, Cody Lambert.
Look, see, now they're upping their appreciation game. I appreciate it. That's good.
All right, just a circle of mutual appreciation going all around. All right, so next question here from Brandon. Javonte Williams, Zamir White, Jalen Warren. I believe those are three names that we have not mentioned at all yet on this show. So an interesting question in that regard. And then also, I mean, just thinking about these guys, I mean, I these are three guys I don't want to be starting. So just sadness for you, Brandon. But if I have to be starting one of them, probably Javonte Williams, but maybe Zamir White. Those are the two that I would be making, I think, the decision between. Do you have any way that you would be leaning on this, Chris?
I'm with you on those because at least for Zamir White, the bet going into the season was that he was going to be the primary back like for the Raiders. And in week one, we see him get, I was like, he wasn't out carried by Alexander Madison, but the target's going to Alexander Madison. Of course, him getting into the end zone. It's just like, well, now what are we supposed to do? Is Antonio Pierce going to continue to ride the hot hand, like which we would assume that that's like a part of his ethos, like as a head coach, and we see more of a split between Zamir White and Madison moving forward? Entirely possible. And of course, to match up against the Ravens like front seven, that lends itself to even more uncertainty for Zamir White. So while Javonte Williams is going to be a part of this Bo Nix led offense, that's what, like a 3.5 yard average depth of target, like from a passing standpoint, we've got those concerns. We have those concerns like for. Who was the third guy? Oh my gosh, like who was
Jalen Warren?
Yeah, Jalen Warren, like not even playing as much as Najee Harris, like in week one. I mean, Javonte Williams is probably the one that, like, because he has at least some sort of carry share, like with Jaleel McLaughlin, and he's also being integrated into the passing game. I don't have those concerns about Jalen Warren. I don't have those concerns about Zamir White. So I'd say Javonte for now, but it's just gross across the board for that trio.
Yeah. All right. So next question here. And we had a trio of running backs who were all a little bit nasty here. Now we've got two wide receivers who are a little bit nasty. Cortland Sutton, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, half PPR in the flex. I mean, the real answer is I'm hoping not to have to start either of these guys. I think it's a situation where last week with the matchup that Sutton had, he was just pretty much in shadow coverage for the entire time. It wasn't a great setup for him. And I think going against the Steelers, he's also going to have, once again, some shadow coverage going against Joey Porter Jr., who's, like a physical player. I don't think it's a great situation for Sutton. That said, like, he's still at least the number one pass catcher on his team. JSN, like the number 2 or number 3 option on his team. I would lean towards Sutton, but like it's not a great situation for him.
Right. And I think that's where I would lean more towards if I had to give it to either of the two, I guess I would lean a bit more towards Sutton just from an opportunity standpoint. But I highlighted in my wide receiver cornerback matchups column that's free over on fantasylife.com that would be like what Sutton would see like for this week, primarily playing like outside. That's where Joey Porter Jr. particularly plays as well. And he also has like the size in order to match like Sutton. Like typically we don't think about like from an receiver archetype stand, but we don't think about like the height and weight of some of these guys. Both are matched like from that standpoint. So even if Bo Nix does decide to let it rip, which is probably unlikely to happen, the ball is going to come into an area where Sutton's not going to be able to use his size in order to really like body defenders and come down with the ball. So while I have concerns, I have just as many concerns about JSN still being third in that pecking order, still having a fairly low average depth of target. So if there was going to be one that I would pick, it's just Sutton, just because of the opportunity, but neither sound great.
Speaking of neither sounds great, this next question here from Dr. Knockers, full PPR, need a flex. Do I start Christian Kirk, Wan'Dale Robinson, or Demarcus Robinson? Let's just start by saying it is not Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, let's just eliminate that from conversation immediately. So then it's Christian Kirk versus Demarcus Robinson. I can see the kind of like allure of Demarcus Robinson and that, okay, no Puka Nacua. Robinson at points did flash a little bit last year. He's on the field all the time. And so like he does have some things going for him. I still think it's Christian Kirk, who is probably still the number one pass catcher within his offense. So I would go with him. I'd say like pretty clearly I would be going with him, but like it's not a slam dunk over Demarcus Robinson.
No, not a slam dunk over Demarcus Robinson, who, like, for the Rams, we like the, to your point, like the allure of the Rams offense, just having a piece to it. 74 offensive plays, like in week one, that was one of the highest in the league. 100% of their passing plays, like, were in 11 personnel. So Demarcus Robinson has the path to being out there every single snap for every single passing play for Matthew Stafford. But I mean, is there a chance that you see what, like, Tyler Jordan getting involved like a bit more? Do you see a chance, like, do you see a path for Colby Parkinson like getting involved in the passing game as well? And of course, Kyron Williams also like being a pass catcher out of the backfield. So it's like, while Demarcus Robinson has that wide receiver 2 role behind Cooper Kupp, we know that to be the case. Like, for Christian Kirk, we know that he's battling for number one position, like in that offense with Brian Thomas Jr. And that has been the case like for the past like a season and a half or so. So I have fewer concerns or less uncertainty about Christian Kirk's role, where with Demarcus Robinson, it's like, yep, he's going to be out there. Yep, he's going to be getting in his cardio. But how many of those targets from Matthew Stafford are going to be going his way? And that's where I lean more towards Kirk.
Yeah, some wind sprints for sure for Demarcus Robinson. A question here from Rob Campoli, Anthony Richardson, or Jaden Daniels. By the way, I should just say, I mentioned this at the top of the show. I will mention it again. If at some point we do not get to your question in the show, or if you just get so impatient from waiting, definitely check out the rankings that we have at Fantasy Life. A number of them are free in there. We've got rankings from Ian, from Waz, from Charch. Dwayne and I also have rankings in there. And then Dwayne and I have projections on the site as well. So obviously we would love to answer your question, love to get to as many of them as possible. If we don't, definitely check out the rankings that we have there for your viewing pleasure. All right, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels. I mean, as much as I love Jaden Daniels, and I will say, like, I am fully invested in Jaden Daniels, like, invested to win Offensive Player of the Year, invested in the over on his season-long rushing total, invested on the over on his passing total, like, invested in him as in, like, I wanted him in all of my dynasty leagues. I wanted him in all, like, he was like the late round quarterback I wanted in redraft. As much as I love Jaden Daniels, I still got to go with Anthony Richardson in this spot, but it's like close. Like, if you look at the rankings, we have Richardson here, and then right underneath him is Jaden Daniels. So I would say, like, you're probably not going to go wrong either way, but I would go with Anthony Richardson.
Yes, I agree. And hats off to Shane Steichen again, showing the fact that he is one of the more, I would say, progressive like play callers in the league. The levers he was pulling for Anthony Richardson in week one, the RPO rate, the play action rate, and of course Anthony Richardson then just using his cannon of an arm to just drop dimes to, and whether it's AD Mitchell or Alec Pierce. I mean, it's all the whole field is available for Anthony Richardson on any particular play, and of course he's also still getting like the looks or the rushing attempts once they get inside of the 20-yard line. So if I've got all of that and I know the playmakers are there for AR, whereas we do have concerns about, is it going to be Zach Ertz still out there running routes and catching passes from Jane Daniels? What is Terry McLaurin's actual like opportunity share like going to look like? Because he even had a down week. Didn't see much out of Luke McCaffrey in week one. So it's like, even if Jane Daniels can get there as a rusher, I don't know how he's going to get there as a passer in order to really be like that quarterback one that we need to. Whereas with Anthony Richardson, all those questions were answered in week one, and I don't have those same questions in week two.
All right, Jordan Love owner here: Stafford, Goff, Herbert, or Baker for 4-point touchdowns in the second half of the question. Javonte Williams or Jaden Reed, half PPR. Thank you. All right, so I would say, I mean, this to me feels like Jared Goff. Like, we know what he's capable of doing within that passing offense. He's playing indoors, playing against a defense that I don't have a huge amount of respect for, and playing in a game with one of the highest totals on the slate. I feel like it's Jared Goff. What do you think here?
Yep, I think that's the easiest one. I mean, Jamal Dean is pretty much the only corner like for the Bucks that like I'm specifically scared of. But if we're assuming that Amon-Ra St. Brown gets back to like his like wide receiver one like type of fantasy production that we're expecting, I would not assume Dean to be on St. Brown for most of those routes. So yeah, outside of those other guys, I mean, yeah, Baker's fine, but again, we always are wondering when the bottom's going to drop out. Stafford is fine, but we have the offensive line concerns for the Rams. So it's like, out of all those guys, give me Goff.
Yeah, and by the way, for a secondary, free safety Antoine Winfield Jr. is out, and slot corner Tyke Smith I think he is also going to be out as well. So like a secondary that is like not playing at full capacity right now. And then the second half of that question was Reed versus Javonte Williams. I probably go Javonte Williams. I think I just kind of want to avoid the general wide receiver situation for the Packers when Malik Willis is the guy throwing to them. All right, from Jacob White. Hey, Jacob. Quarterback question. Would you drop Caleb for Baker? I got Purdy on my roster as well. Thanks. So I would say in general, if you have Brock Purdy on your roster, you probably don't need the second quarterback unless it's just like really deep benches. But I would say in general, I probably just have the one quarterback on my roster and try to use those other roster spots for, backup running backs, rookie wide receivers who might break out, something like that. But if you're still going to commit that second roster spot to a quarterback, then I would say I'd probably still rather have Caleb Williams versus Baker, because like we know what Baker is. He's probably not going to be able to replicate in the future weeks what he did last week and what he might do this week. I still think he has a decent matchup this week, but what Baker is. Williams, if you're keeping a quarterback in a number 2 spot on your roster, you're hoping for that upside. And I think Williams still has the upside there that you want access to. But that's the way I would approach it. I would drop Williams for like a backup running back. But if you're keeping a quarterback, Williams is the guy I would keep.
Right. And if you are going to be holding a second quarterback and you're like, we're both assuming that you're starting Purdy most weeks, the 49ers don't have their bye until week 9. So that means you have almost 2 months that you're going to be holding. You're basically burning an additional bench spot in order to hold either of the two, whether it's Mayfield or Williams. So that's thing one. And so I agree that I would take a shot on who the next Jordan Mason is going to be, or if you got to pick up Zach Charbonnet, like any of those like contingent running backs, it's going to be, might be Tyler Algier next weekend, knock on wood. But if you have to hold a quarterback and it is between those two, Baker Mayfield plays the Chiefs in week 9, or Caleb Williams plays the Arizona Cardinals in week 9. So if you had to start either one of those two, I would take Caleb Williams at this point.
Great call there on the schedule as well, and thinking about the buys. But yeah, that's so long off that you probably don't really need to be thinking about it too much at this point. All right, start to Robinson, Reed, McConkey. Because Reed and McConkey are wide receivers, I'm going to assume he's talking about DeMarcus Robinson instead of like Brian Robinson. But I think McConkey is the guy that I definitely would want to start out of those three. And then Robinson versus Reed, I'm probably avoiding the Packers wide receiver situation and going with DeMarcus Robinson, but like it's close. Like Reed is the more talented player. Verification is DeMarcus, not Brian. So yeah, I would go McConkey and then probably Robinson, but I can't blame you if you go with Jaden Reed because he's the better player.
Yeah, he is the better player, but there still are those concerns. This is assuming Jordan Love was even on the field. There was some concerns about his snap rate being taken off the field in 12 personnel sets. And I don't know if they're going to continue running more 12 just to give more protection to Malik Willis now that he's under center. Yeah. So while Reed is the better player, just staying away from the Packers passing game for this 1 week, I think it's fair assuming you have other options. So in this case, it looks like he does.
All right, Marvin Harrison or Chris Godwin. This is great because like a week ago or like entering the season, people have been like, what is this question? Like Marvin Harrison easily. Yeah. And now we're like 1 week into the season and people are like, oh man, I got these Marvin Harrison bags. What am I going to do? So anyway, but Godwin, Godwin has played in the slot, returned to the slot this year. He looked good last week. And he's got a matchup this week going against Amik Robertson, who is like up to this point in his career, a perimeter corner who is now shifted to the slot. And we just saw him get destroyed by Cooper Kupp last week. And that's not to say like, oh, Cooper Kupp beat this one cornerback, so the next guy who goes against him is going to beat him as well. But it's just like we're seeing a cornerback who is playing out of position relative to where he has been for the most part throughout his career. And Godwin, as an experienced slot guy, it feels like he's set up to be able to take advantage of that. So I would go with Godwin over Harrison. You see that in the start sit tool. Pretty sure that's how I have it in my rankings. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and this is going to be a matchup that we know that we want to target, like between the Bucks and the Lions. Godwin moving into the slot, like playing that higher route rate that we expected, at least relative to last year. Like I know there is some hype for Jalen McMillan to rotate in, like as the wide receiver 3 or as the interior guy on some plays, but with how much opportunity Godwin earned in week 1, how much Harrison didn't earn in week 1, you got to go Godwin as of right now until we see more.
All right. Thanks for the question, Jim Jam. And thanks for the thanks. All right. We got 15 minutes left in the show. For everyone who's joining us now, we're running through as many of your questions as we can get to. If we don't get to it, be sure to check out the free fantasy life rankings that we have on the site. I'm Freedman. He's Chris. Let's get to it. Pick one, full PPR: Ford, Ramondre, Charbonnet, McConkey. All right. So a number of guys just listed there. I will say, this is the first time we've mentioned Ramondre Stevenson on the show, who was super impressive last week. Just total dominator in terms of how he was used within that offense. Yeah, but of course, Charbonnet coming in should get the full workload. And I was also impressed with what we saw out of Jerome Ford, just in terms of like utilization within the backfield. There were questions about how much he would be used, but like he's still the guy. As long as like Chubb is out, Jerome Ford is the guy leading that backfield.
Mm-hmm.
I lean towards Ramondre Stevenson. Like I think the Patriots are still going to be pretty run heavy in terms of how they want to use their offense. And I know that with the new defensive system in Seattle, they should be better, a lot better than they were last year. And they looked pretty good last week. But I just want to say it's only 1 week. It's still like a rookie head coach. And they were going against Bo Nix, like a guy who doesn't really challenge defenses in general. And a guy who's making his NFL debut. Like this might still be a defense that has some problems.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're in that situation, I will probably want to attack them with Ramondre Stevenson, but that's just the way that I lean here. How do you feel, Chris?
Coin flip between those two, and I will say that because it's either the Patriots offensive line or my Bengals defensive line, probably more of the latter than the former, that allowed Ramondre Stevenson to play so well for like $120 and a touchdown. Yeah. But I think it's not just the rushing production, but it's the fact that Stevenson still got like 3 targets in that offense. And so while Ford was also involved in the passing game, 6-7 targets, it's still a dysfunctional passing game piloted by Deshaun Watson. So if I want to at least take away the uncertainty or the volatility with the Browns offense and still get the same amount of rushing opportunities, I would say Stevenson at least gets the edge here.
All right. So while you were talking, it just popped up. Adam Schefter reported that Marshawn Lloyd, who was out last week with a hamstring injury, was listed questionable, practice limited every day this week. He is expected to go this week. I think that was generally expected, given that he was able to practice every day this week. I don't think this is really going to impact the way that I'm projecting or ranking Josh Jacobs, but just something to keep in mind, maybe limits his upside a little bit. All right. Question from Patrick: Dak or Goff? Already playing Laporta and Gibbs, also play Godwin over AJB with no news. So yes, you are playing Godwin, in my opinion, definitely playing him over AJ Brown, who is very, very likely to be out on Monday Night Football, especially with it being Monday Night Football. You just want to avoid the possibility of taking any zeros. And then Godwin on his own is already a pretty decent option. And then the other question, it was Dak versus Goff, and you're already stacking Laporta, and I believe it was Gibbs.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good question, because since you're already assuming, hey, I've got these other guys, I'm going to assume they go off. It's kind of tempting to go with Goff, but at the same time, you don't really need to stack it. But I probably go with Goff in that situation.
Yeah, I think the DFS like mentality in me, like just thinking about lineups for today, would see like if you're already playing 2 and both of them are involved in the passing game, then that would correlate to Goff having a big day. If you're assuming Laporta has a big day, you're assuming Gibbs has a big day, then Goff should at least be serviceable. And with Prescott like going against the Saints like secondary, like yeah, I could see like CeeDee Lamb like having a solid day, but like outside of that, like who are we really expecting to pull like Prescott like into like a good fantasy day? Because it's not like the rushing component is going to be there for him
Yeah.
as much as it was like in years past. So it's like, unless I like really was hyped about like, you know, Schoonmaker, I was like, oh, like this is going to be the week for Jalen Tolbert. Like I'm not feeling those like warm fuzzies about either of those guys. So if you've already got two pieces from the Lions offense, like at the ready, like for you, then I would say just take the third and start Goff.
All right. So one more way to think about this. If you look at the rankings that we have here, these are two of the three guys at the top of tier 3, right? They're basically right next to each other. It's, I think, kind of a coin flip. And so if you are in a situation where coming out of Thursday night football, you are already trailing, or you can kind of look at your matchup and you expect that you're the dog in your matchup, then I think you go with Goff, because at that point you really are thinking about kind of stacking points on points and looking for ceiling outcomes. If you're probably the favorite in your matchup, then I think maybe you go with Dak, just to give yourself like a little more like kind of diversification, to where you're just not so invested in the Lions, to where like if they tank, you're basically killing 3 roster spots in your lineup. That's maybe the way I would think about it. But as you can see there in the rankings we have in Fantasy Life, they're very closely projected.
Mhm.
All right, next question here: is Michael Pittman a start for this week? I don't know. I mean, I think it just league settings, you know, it kind of depends. But
Yeah.
I mean, Pittman, it's tough, because what makes Anthony Richardson so incredibly sexy as a fantasy option is the running ability, which doesn't help Pittman at all, and is also his ability just to throw it 50 yards down the field, which also doesn't really help Pittman at all. And so I would say, like, yeah, I mean, he's the number one option in his offense in theory. You know, I have him ranked number 24. That's kind of the general range where we have him ranked as a staff, you know, 24 to 30-ish in that range. So that puts him like right on the cusp of being started in a lot of leagues, probably started in most leagues. But like, if it's a shallower league, you're maybe not starting him, or, you know, kind of just depending on your matchup, your team, you might not be starting him. So it's just like, that's the kind of thing to where it's totally at your discretion.
Yeah, and if I was seeing more of a downfield usage like for Michael Pittman, then okay, cool. I could see that. But to your point, the stylistic like differences between like how Michael Pittman runs routes and how AR like takes the like passes downfield, it just doesn't fit for that. So if you have like other options like on your team that would be more of those guys that are earning targets, like aren't like really like, you know, just a part of the passing game, but actually leading their team's passing game, then okay, fine. Because like, yeah, 8 targets like for Michael Pittman in week 1, but like 31 yards, just because that's how he runs routes and that's where he's deployed like on the field. So depending on your other options, I would look to like those wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s that you might have on your roster, and make that decision there without having any other context about your team.
All right. So question here, Charbonnet, Aaron Jones, Ladd, JMO. All right. I will say that I think this is probably Charbonnet, but we haven't talked about Aaron Jones yet. We haven't talked about Jameson Williams. I was impressed with what we saw out of Aaron Jones. He didn't like totally dominate usage within the backfield, but he was his typical efficient Aaron Jones type of self last week. This week is a little bit different, tougher matchup going against the 49ers, but the 49ers defense is not as fearsome as it used to be. I think still a little bit vulnerable against the run. So I can see a case for Aaron Jones. And then Jameson Williams. I am impressed by what we have seen out of Jameson Williams. I know it's a 2-game sample, but, you know, going back to last year's playoffs, was it the NFC Championship game? Impressed by what we saw out of him there. At that point, that was the most snaps he had played in his career. And then last week, again, a new career record for him in snaps played. So the 2 games in which he's played the most in his career, those were the games in which he's, you know, like kind of been the best, you know? And so like, I'm not going to say like Jameson Williams is now the number 1 receiver in Detroit, but I'm just going to say, you know, Amon-Ra St. Brown was on the team and they still drafted Jameson Williams with the number 12 pick overall. The first year was wiped out because of injury. A lot of the second year was wiped out because of the suspension. But like what we saw last week with Williams getting, was it 9 targets last week? Like
Yep.
last week, he was the number 1 receiver on the team. So there's just the possibility that he ends up continuing, I won't say to dominate, but continuing to carve out a really reliable role for himself within that offense. And if that's the case, that doesn't mean you're starting him this week, but I'm just going to say, like, he's someone you do not want to like trade away or anything like that. Like, things could be pointing up for him. So it's probably still Charbonnet for me, but Jones was really intriguing last week. And if he had a better matchup this week, I would probably be leaning with Jones versus Charbonnet. It helps that, Charbonnet is a favorite. Aaron Jones is a dog. I just, in situations like this where the rankings tend to be close, I tend to lean more towards the favorite. Jameson Williams, if you want the theoretical upside that comes with a wide receiver, I think he's the wide receiver you go with. I lean towards Charbonnet here, but those other guys are interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. It's like between like either Williams or Sharbs. So Sharbs for the workload, and then Williams for the upside. So that might be like a matchup discussion. So it's like, hey, if you came out of Thursday night going up against James Cook, all right, maybe Jameson like might be the guy for you. If you're sitting 0-0 coming into this morning, Charbonnet like might be the guy. But Jameson Williams, like, it's almost like the conversation we were having earlier about Isaiah Likely versus Mark Andrews. We're not going to see those like lesser target games for Amon-Ra St. Brown like every single week, where it's Jameson Williams being the guy that's the wide receiver 1. So while Amon-Ra's target share, like his like high end ceiling target share, might get capped because Jameson Williams did show to be efficient, also used as a can also be used as a rusher out of the backfield. It allows for Jameson Williams to still get some of those opportunities week in and week out, but to say that he's going to get 7, 8, 9 targets every week, that might be a little bit of a stretch. So if you need the explosiveness for this week, okay, I can understand going to Jameson Williams. I think that's why, like, the tool, and both of us agree, Charbonnet is probably the better play for week 2, just given the opportunity workload.
And one more thing here to talk about Jameson Williams. I mean, I expect him to play in this game, but it is notable that he is technically questionable. He did practice every day this week, but he was limited in all of those practices. I expect him to play. I don't think he's really going to be playing with any sort of like limitation or anything, but something to keep in mind. And then also, you mentioned it earlier, Chris, Jamel Dean as the one guy in that secondary for the Buccaneers that you do have respect for. I don't think he's going to be shadowing Jameson Williams, but like he will be going up against Williams for a decent chunk of that matchup, which means, probably fewer targets this week than he had last week. All right, Chase Brown or Tajay Spears. Where are you thinking you want to invest here?
I would say if I had to invest in either one of those two offenses, I have to be biased and at least lean towards like the like Chase Brown and like in the Bengals, at least from a run blocking standpoint. The Bengals offensive line was able to operate so that we saw Zach Moss be somewhat effective as a runner, even though it's really the passing game that we're looking towards. And Tajay Spears sitting behind Tony Pollard, who was explosive as a runner, like for the Titans. And if we still have concerns about Will Levis as a passer and what the rest of that offense is going to look like as a whole, I guess I'll lean towards the team that at least I hope can still put up points and still move the ball down the field. But that hope might shift by the end of today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real answer is neither. I would have the slightest of lean towards Tajay Spears, but I don't want the number 2 running back in an offense that's quarterbacked by Will Levis. I will say that just as a general life philosophy. Give me not that.
Yeah.
All right, final play here. Gamble AJ plays with Mooney as pivot, or Tyler Johnson versus the Cards. I mean, look, Mooney is not a pivot. Like, let's just, I want to be like super clear about that. So like that just automatically kind of shooting from the hip makes me say Tyler Johnson, but it's not like I want Tyler Johnson in my life either. So man, I don't know. How do you feel about this one?
I guess just given the matchup, I would, and also the quarterback stability, I would just rather go with the guy that would be catching passes from Stafford versus Kirk Cousins. Because with the litany of issues that we already highlighted for the Falcons passing game, whether it's like just Kirk in particular or what that offense is going to look like, because I mean, it's Drake London, it's Kyle Pitts, and we've also saw Bijan Robinson, as Dwayne McFarland noted in utilization, being one of the high end targeters for that team. So really looking at the fourth option from Kirk
Yeah.
Cousins, or let's say like the third option from Matthew Stafford. So I guess if you look at it from that standpoint, I guess I would probably lean towards like Tyler Johnson here.
Yeah, and in terms of the matchup, the Cardinals' pass defense was bad last year. The Eagles' pass defense was bad last year. I don't think, like, matchup wise, there's a big edge either way. So I would probably, be going with, yeah, with Johnson, who, like, conceivably, like, you could see how he ends up like number 2 on the team in targets this week. Like, so,
Yeah.
like, that's within the range of outcomes. Like, that is not going to happen for Darnell
No,
Mooney.
no.
You're hoping for like a 60-yard touchdown with
Yeah.
Mooney. That's what it is. All right, Chris, this was awesome. You mentioned earlier the wide receiver cornerback matchup piece that you have. Just give the people the information. What should they be checking out in terms of your work at Fantasy Life?
So every week, 2 shows with Dwayne McFarland and Ian Hartitz, like every week. But then from a writing standpoint, looking at just the wide receiver cornerback matchup. So I've got 2 guys to avoid, 2 guys to maybe try and highlight, some sneaky starts as well, so that we talked a bit about it through the show, and then also doing the injury roundup. I mean, some of the stuff we talked about, minus the whole AJ Brown thing. I mean, those things that we'll need to track throughout the week to make those smart lineup decisions. Both those pieces should be live on fantasylife.com, like by the end of the week. So, I mean, if you ever have any questions, just hit me up on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. So come on, y'all. And good luck to everybody in week 2.
Yes, good luck to everyone. Thank you for joining us. This was lots of fun. Appreciate all the questions. Appreciate the gratitude. Best of luck to everyone on this Sunday morning. It's week 2 NFL. I mean, look, there's still some NFL season to go, obviously, but like we're starting to feel like we're in the grind of it. Like, and I say grind, not in a bad way, like in a good way. Like we're starting to get into the rhythm of how the season is progressing. So a lot of fun to have you all joining us here for Sunday morning. He's Chris Allen. I'm Matt Freedman. Thank you for joining us. Best of